mean, a simple thing like intubation should be able to be delivered by a nurse and not need the service of the doctor. It's a very simple procedure. So
well, look, I mean, there's two debates here. Let's say there's two debates. One is how should we fund healthcare? I mean, private, public. Should the government continue, with a public funding? Is the Medicare model the right model? Let's put that on the side for a moment. Let's deal with what we've currently got. The problem you see in healthcare is a problem of the public service. Grade creep and additional grades has always been used to get around wage fixing principles, as you would know if you were a commissioner of the Industrial Relations Commission. You invent grades and it allows you to get around that. But there is a more fundamental problem, and that is the model of healthcare provision in the hospitals, and I go broader than that, the whole model of healthcare, the appropriate model. And I think that from all the reports I've seen, the expert reports, the reality is it's not the right model, and it starts right from primary health care. There may well be a role for nurses being involved in the primary health care component of it under a broader model that targets risk and factors and all those sorts of things. The bottom line is we're not going to know, and we're not going to be able to deal with it whilst it remains within the current confused funding and administrative arrangements. But the bottom line is that there's no difference in healthcare to some of the other areas. Go into education. My wife's a school counsellor. To become a school counsellor, you need, of course, to have a psychology degree. But what I didn't realise, and what she didn't realise, is you also have to be a teacher. Now, you don't teach, but the Teachers Federation controls the grades in there, and they insist that only teachers can be school counsellors. Do they? Well, that's good. In New South Wales,
you have to hold a master's.
That's even worse.
Thank you.
But you can see that's exactly the same model. We've got all these problems in schools, discipline problems, all sorts of things, but we can't hire people to deal with those problems based on professional skills in a normal marketplace. We've got to run them through a structure that has no relevance at all within the outcome space. Look, to me, it's all about outcome space. What are you seeking to do? What's the best way to do it? But the whole public service is riddled with these outdated, outmoded divisions of labour, if you want to call it that. A lot of it used to get around wage fixing principles and attract people in sort of sub-markets where they wouldn't let the market operate because it would cause them problems. Is professionalisation of nursing the right thing? I don't know. I know what I was around where it was put in. I know it was part of trying to increase nurses' salaries. That's all it was.
One more quick one. Nick.
You've talked about the governance structures. You're focused on health, particularly, but there's also the other side, which is the representation side. And if you were to follow the centralisation model, which I think is pretty difficult from an economic point of view to argue against, then what's going to happen is some of those responsibilities suck up to the Commonwealth, and then you have to deal with the state representations and then the local council representations. We've got to be massively over-governed, but does that sort of structure, that sort of centralisation start sucking some of those things up and effectively make the local council component of the administration irrelevant? And then where does then local representation sit?
Well, look, firstly, I'm not arguing for a centralised model of service delivery. Far from it. I believe in a local model of service delivery, and I even think that in many of the larger states that would be at a regional level. I come from the Hunter, and it's got the best operating area health service in New South Wales. Why it has to report back down to Sydney, and why it can't have a local board that has real skills on it to support the operation, that is beyond me. But you're not going to get that. You can't get that because they don't control it. I mean, how do you set it up? You put a bunch of, as I said to you, the Jack Welch, model. You put these people on these boards, and then you tell them, well, you don't control the funding. No, you can't charge for the services in a way that helps you raise the revenue or makes the allocation more efficiently. And secondly, we expect you to do all these things that are unnecessary because we've got a national health policy that says you should do it. You just can't run those things. So under my model, it's only the funding The Commonwealth you should be able to go to one tier of government and say, you're responsible for health in this country, financially. And whether that's done through, a full public model, or it's done by a sort of composite model that has private and public. I have the composite model because you need the competition. It needs to be that case, or you're going to continue the blame game. And you say to me, well, it's unrealistic, but the Prime Minister promised this before the last election. And I said hooray when he did that. I thought, this is it, this is the breakthrough. But they're not following through on it because I think there's no pressure on them to do it. The states don't want to do this. Not all the states. So New South Wales, and it varies. When I was there, when who was it? It was Tony Abbott was health minister. He came out one day and attacked us all for being incompetent, not being able to manage our hospitals. So I got up and said, "Yep, you can have them." And then he sort of ran 1,000,000 miles, No, but what happened was the Prime Minister had to interview was how he said, I don't believe that the Commonwealth can run hospitals any better than the states. And that's right, they can't under the current model. It'll be the same outcome. Some of the other states, through politics, don't want to hand over the health system. If you hand over the health system or the funding of it, you might lose a health minister in a cabinet, or you might lose a few health bureaucrats. I'll tell all their ministers, Minister, you can't do that. That's very courageous to give the Commonwealth control. On the other side, Ken Henry would be having, conniptions at the thought that he's going to have to fund the whole of the health system. He would have said, "Oh, who made that promise? How do we get out of it?" Give him a bit extra on, emergency, elective surgery and those sorts of things, which, by the way, was done because one thing in a system that doesn't have any pricing signals, the only way you control your ration through the elective waiting lists. And here they are, they throw all this money and just make the situation worse, change people's expectations of waiting lists, and then nobody can meet them in the future. So they've actually increased long-term the costs. So I don't think this is that. That's why I would say don't worry about all the rest of it, just stick to health because it's so critically important. And again, I'd also add ageing and disability in this. Who delivers it? Well, I don't think there's any reason to have necessarily a debate about the future of state governments on this. I think once you put these things in place, they will be regional. And over time, you don't want to get caught up in arguing matters of sort of political principle, a la the Republic, where nobody really cares about it, and you get all passionate about it. You let it evolve. Time will take care of that. If you've got local area, we're using health as an example, local area health boards, they've got proper funding arrangements, proper accountability, and they have to report to it. It becomes quasi-government anyhow, and it becomes at a local level. Clearly, the council structures, I know that Kenneth did some good work in Victoria. We haven't been able to do it in New South Wales to that extent. The Queenslanders have had all sorts of problems as well, merging local governments, but leave that aside. I mean, at the end of the day, it's those key service areas and what mechanisms we put in place that ultimately will determine the service delivery in those areas, and that ultimately will give a focus for power and administrative power.
Rightio.
Okay.
You're happy to keep going, so fire away.
Yeah.
Came all the way down here.
Your speech was very insightful. You talked a lot about government spending. So what do you think about the NBN investment of the government?
I'm a huge sceptic. Look, I don't know, anybody that's technologically literate has got to question what the federal government's proposing. Firstly, I don't think governments can deliver these things anyhow. That's the first concern I have about it, and I've seen this from the point of view of capital works programs everywhere. Governments are hopeless at dealing with these things, as the Commonwealth is experiencing with the schools rollout. I don't understand what the rationale is for doing it. I know that Tasmania's going to, you're going to get some benefits out of it. Good. They should have a trial. This is the right place to have the trial because I think it will expose some of the problems with it. Fibre to the home. We were discussing at lunchtime. I just don't understand that. I cannot understand how this is going to occur and how you're going to roll it out across the nation in a sort of cost-effective way